Hello, friends, and welcome back to Chaotic Crime. And welcome back to Monday Motherfucking Madness. Dong, 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 bom, bom, bom. I've got that High School Musical song stuck in my head. The one, I'm pretty sure it's High School Musical, like, what time is it? Summertime. I think that's High School Musical. And I feel like, like, what time is it? Monday Madness time. Oh, no. No. Yeah. I've okay. Enough now, Tal, because you're going to give yourself the ick the entire episode if you carry on like this. My goodness. But in my land, when I'm recording this, it's a Sunday and I've Sunday reset. I've got the house to myself. My puppy dog's looking at me. Life is so good today. And I feel relaxed and ready to give you guys another Monday Madness case. Another case that just, plays on my motherfucking mind. But honestly, I am starting to feel like that's so many cases. Like, you should see my iPad. My iPad is just crime cases. I feel like if the police tapped me, they would think I was plotting something pretty dark until they have a, little bit of a further deep dive, as one would say, only to discover I just choose to expose myself to craziness. If you could hear that little ding dong in the background, that was my dog just finding a comfy spot on the couch for himself, preparing himself for the story as well. So for today's Monday Madness episode, I'm going to bring you guys a case or cases that has been requested to me. One time was by a local friend of mine. So I'm hoping that she sees this and sees that I've done a little bit of a deep dive. And I'm hoping that this is one that we will continue to deep dive, because I am hoping that it's one that eventually we get some answers. So today we're not just back with any story. We're diving into one that has haunted me ever since I stumbled across it. Because when you think of Byron Bay, what comes to your mind? Probably golden beaches, sun-soaked surf culture, wellness retreats, bohemian markets. It is an Australian postcard of absolute paradise. It's a hot spot. It's the kind of place that people go to escape, to heal, to breathe, and to find a new version of themselves. But beneath that paradise, there is a little bit of darkness, and emphasis on the little bit. A lot of darkness. There's a thread of disappearances and deaths that stretch across not just Byron itself, but along the New South Wales coast, from Newcastle into south of Byron all the way to north. So, quick disclaimer before we go any further: if this is your first time listening to the podcast, if you haven't already figured it out by my very obnoxious accent, I'm Australian. So this case does center around, I guess, home. New South Wales is a different state to where I am and where I grew up. So I grew up in Queensland, but Byron is one of the most infamous places in Australia for not just travellers, but for locals as well. But for decades in Byron Bay, young women have gone missing. Families have been left searching and communities have been whispering. And the investigators are often fumbling, dismissing, or simply just walking away. Now, some people do believe it's a coincidence. Others believe that it's clusters of predators. And then there are those, such as former MPs or grieving families, who believe that it might just be the work of one or maybe more serial killers that are hiding in plain sight. So my chaotic crime besties, buckle the fuck in. I know I say that, but just put your seatbelt on. We're going to make a couple pit stops like we always do. So this is the Byron Bay Murders, a story of paradise tainted, of families silenced, and of a coastline that may hold secrets darker than anyone could ever imagine. Okay, so if you've ever been to Byron Bay yourself, or you've just scrolled through Instagram, you know the picture of Byron. Can you Byron, God, I sound so Australian. That's so annoying. I wish I had a nice petite accent. I really, really do. But the more I age, the more bogan I seem to get, which is just brutal. It's just brutal. So if you haven't seen Byron, I'm going to paint a picture. As you know, we love to paint a picture around here. So you've got the waves rolling in and they're slow and golden. And one of Byron's most infamous beaches is called Main Beach. Backpackers are sunburnt and smiling. Guitars are slung over shoulders. The lighthouse is perched proudly upon its headland. There are yoga mats, crystal shops, organic markets, a place that feels almost outside of time, a place where people go to find themselves or lose themselves in the surf and the stars. So really, when I'm painting it out like that, it sounds like paradise. And I don't necessarily want people, definitely don't want people to get scared off by Byron, because it's a beautiful place and it's still very overpopulated. I say overpopulated. It is overpopulated by backpackers. It's a lot of backpackers. I work within tourism and that's where a majority of our, business comes from, both there and Cairns. So don't be shunned away from Byron. It's a great spot. So Byron Bay isn't always postcards and festivals. For decades, it's been haunted by something darker. A trail of disappearances, unsolved murders, and grieving families that are still yet to get any answers. And it's not just Byron. This shadow stretches across the coastline, from Newcastle up through the beaches and highways of northern New South Wales, all the way down to Byron Bay. Now, this began in the late 1970s. At least 67 young women and girls, mostly aged between 14 and 20, have either vanished without a trace or have been found dead along that stretch of coast. Now, we're talking a mixed variety of people as well. Some were backpackers, some were locals, some were even hitchhiking home from work. Others were just simply walking down the street. Now, the official stories that we were given for quite a few of these cases is that they were often just written off as runaways, as accidents, or as tragedies without any villains. But most of the families of these young women didn't buy it. None of them bought it. And over time, the number of cases grew too high, too similar to simply just ignore. So here is the chilling truth, I think, in a lot of cases, is that what can look like paradise on the surface may in fact hide one of Australia's largest unsolved serial crime patterns. Now, that can be any location in the world. Obviously, I'm talking about Australia here, but that's just a reality. Like looking in any like you think a place is safe, and it is primarily safe. I think, like we always say, so much of these stories and cases seem to just be bad luck, bad timing, wrong place, wrong time. Nobody seemed to have really put themselves in a position. So obviously I'm just talking about Australia when I'm using that statement, but I'm also talking in a whole, that there are a lot of locations that look like paradise but can hold secrets. It can be small communities, big communities. I just don't think location is a factor that we can always play a part in. Like, I guess not play a part, that's probably the wrong way to word it. I mean, use that as the sole reason as to why a situation happened. I'm glad I rephrased that. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. So to understand the Byron Bay murders, we've got to start further south, in Newcastle in the late 1970s. It was a steel town, tough and close-knit. Kids rode their bikes until dark, families knew their neighbours, and teenagers dreamed of leaving for bigger things. But between 1978 and 1979, 3 girls disappeared in ways that would still haunt the Hunter region today. Now, we've talked about pattern a lot before in cases, but the pattern in this case is made of people, and the pattern in a lot of cases is made of people. Now, they're not faceless victims. They're daughters, their sisters, and their friends. They're girls that had futures and families that are still waiting for answers. So Robin Hickey was the first to vanish. In February 1978, Robin Hickey was 15 years old. and she lived within the Belmont community just outside of New South Wales with her family. Robin was described as bright, funny, and a streak of independence that comes with a teenager in any late 70s. Now, I spoke to my dad about this, so when I said that statement, he knew exactly what I meant. If you're a little bit confused, go ask your parents. So on Saturday night, Robin had told her parents that she was heading into Newcastle. She had left the house around 6 p.m, wearing a red t-shirt, shorts, and sandals. Witnesses saw her at the bus stop on the Pacific Highway near her home. Now, at this time when she was spotted, she was waiting alone. And then she just vanished. Now, her family reported her missing almost immediately. The police told them not to worry. To the authorities, Robin was just another runaway, a teenager that was fed up with the rules at home and off to start her own adventure. And her family never believed that. They never bought that. Robin was close to her parents and her siblings. She didn't take any money, clothes, or belongings with her, but it is clear that she never came home. However, for the Hickey family, every day turned into waiting. Every phone call, every knock at the door, every tiny flicker of hope. But the years went on and the hope faded, and Robin has never been found. Now, Amanda Robinson was the second girl to go missing. This was just 2 months later in April of 1979. She was 14 and she was a Catholic schoolgirl, shy and cheerful, the kind of kid who loves spending time with her friends. So on April 21st, Amanda went to a school dance in Hamilton. She was laughing and happy and surrounded by her friends. When the dance ended at around 10 p.m, Amanda had decided to walk home. It wasn't far, but she never made it. Witnesses came forward and said that they saw her walking along the Late Gate Road in Gateshead. God, that's a tongue tie. I thought because I was covering an Australian case, I wouldn't get many tongue ties. Nah, come on. I just don't know words or English. Now, exactly like Robin's case, she seemed perfectly normal, not upset and not distressed. And then nothing. So Amanda's parents went on to report her missing. Once again, the police had simply just assumed it was another runaway case. But Amanda's father had refused to accept this. He told anybody that would listen that his daughter was not a runaway. She had no reason to leave, no plan, and no resources. And that she was just 14 years old. The Robinson family were left devastated after Amanda's disappearance, and Amanda's case joined Robin's in the growing cloud of unanswered questions. Now, Leanne Goodall, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, her last name, was the third girl to go missing. Now, between Robin and Amanda, another girl had already disappeared. Now, I'm going to correct myself here because I realized I just made a mistake. In between Robin and Amanda's disappearance, there was another girl that went missing, which I knew, but I've just done the order. I said the order wrong. I said that Amanda was the second, but Amanda was the third, and Leanne Goodall was the second girl to go missing in between Amanda and Robin. So this happened in December 1978. Leanne was a 19-year-old girl who was living with her family in Broadmeadow, Newcastle. She was outgoing, bubbly, and full of energy. People would go on to say that they would remember her laugh and the way that she could just simply light up a room. Now, on the night she vanished, Leanne had been visiting her sister, Pam, and some other family friends. She left the location that she was around 9 p.m. to catch a bus back home, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Her brother Gary has been one of the most outspoken advocates for the girls. For decades, he kept Leanne's memory alive, campaigning for investigations, appearing in docuseries, and refusing to let her disappear in silence. He describes Leanne as someone who loved life, loved people, and would never have just walked away from her family. So like Robin and Amanda, she was written off as a runaway. But the Goodall family joined the long list of relatives stuck in limbo that didn't believe that their children had run away, but they had no body, no answers, just an open wound. So at this point, a pattern is starting to take shape. We've got 3 young women, all from Newcastle, that all vanished within a year, 15, 14, and 19. None of these women were ever found and have ever been found. And none of these girls left behind any signs of planning or reasons to leave. And every single case was dismissed as a runaway. And to their families, this pattern that is starting to take shape is a pattern that cannot be ignored. So here's the part that's beginning to really chill me as I'm researching this, and I'm going to kind of describe how I'm feeling as I'm reading these parts. These girls, like, it's so clear when you're reading it that they did not have a plan in place. Like, these are not women. These are kids that were last seen walking home or waiting for a bus on ordinary nights, that had shown no previous signs that they were going to run away, that had taken nothing with them, that were majority, apart from maybe Leanne being 19, but 14 and 15 aren't necessarily ages that you can just up and go with no plan and no support behind you. It doesn't ring clear to me. And the fact that it was dismissed so easily, I mean, you obviously can't get into investigators' mindsets, but leaves you with questions, does it not? So as the years went on, the same story began to repeat. Girls vanishing, families silenced, and the police were reluctant to investigate any further. And this pattern began to stretch all the way up north, up the Pacific Highway, towards the beaches and hinterlands of Byron Bay. Now, the case I feel that a lot of people know, especially outside of Australia, that relates to the Byron Bay murders is Theo Hayez. Hang on. So translates telling me that it's Theo Hayez. So I'm going to go with that, but I could be wrong. Apologies if I am. So Theo was 18 and he was really just a boy at the time of traveling to Australia. He was a bright, adventurous Belgian kid who had taken a gap year before starting university. His friends and family back home described him as gentle and a little shy at first, but always coming really passionate and one of your most loyal friends after warming up. And he was always the most fun once you got to know him. He loved soccer, he loved exploring, and he was extremely close to his family. So Australia was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. He landed in Sydney and travelled all the way up the coast. He had met other backpackers, and by late May of 2019, he had arrived in Byron Bay. So he checked himself into a place called the Wake Up Hostel. Now, if you guys are familiar with Byron Bay, you would know this place. It was buzzing with travellers all over the world, swapping stories, playing guitar in the common room. And by the night of May 31st, Theo had gone out with new friends to the Cheeky Monkey. Now, this was a local Byron Bay nightclub known for cheap drinks and backpacker chaos. The security cameras captured him inside the venue at around 11 p.m, leaving the club alone. He wasn't stumbling and he didn't appear to be drunk. And then, like the common factor in these stories, silence. When Theo had failed to check out of his hostel days later, staff found all of his belongings untouched, his passport, his clothes, and even his wallet. He hadn't gone travelling and it didn't appear as though he had left voluntarily. Something had happened that night. So police went on to trace his phone data and it suggested that he had walked out of town, away from the lights, through the bushland and towards the cliffs near the Tullow Beach. Now, this is known to be a dangerous rocky area where it's especially dangerous at night. So theories have been explored, such as did he fall, was he chased, or did someone lure him out there? His parents refused to believe that he has simply just gotten lost. Theo was curious, but he was sensible and not reckless. His father, Laurent, flew to Australia and spent weeks combing the bushlands with volunteers, desperately searching for his son. And unfortunately, no body was ever discovered. The only thing that has managed to come up in the searches was Theo's cap. Now, this was discovered months later in the scrub. To this day, Theo's family believe that there was foul play involved, that Theo was not alone that night, that someone knows more than what is being said, and that Byron Bay's reputation as a safe paradise for backpackers will never fully recover. Then there's the case of Jackson Stacker. Jackson was 24 years old in 2021. He had grown up in a small town and drifted towards Byron Bay for the lifestyle that so many Australians craved. This was surf, music, friends, and freedom. His parents, Scotty and Janine, described him as warm, easygoing, and again, he was somebody that could light up a room with his smile. But Jackson had also struggled throughout his life. Like many young men, he carried invisible battles, anxiety, and many mental health issues. But still, his family say that he was deeply loved and never the kind of person that would give up on life. So on June 24 in 2021, Jackson's body was found in a paddock in the Byron hinterland. What police described at first as a possible suicide quickly raised more questions than answers. Jackson was found with a knife inside of his chest, and his skull was discovered meters away from his body. However, the police leaned towards suicide, and his parents immediately knew that something was wrong. How could their son have done this to himself? How does a skull end up separate from a body in an open paddock? Now, I haven't inserted my opinion too much yet because there's so much to cover in this Monday Madness episode, but genuine fucking question is being asked there, is how does that happen? How does one's skull end up in an open paddock if they've done it to themselves? It's meters away from his body. There's a knife in his chest. I'm just really trying to, again, paint a picture, because if you've got even a logical fucking brain cell in that head, you know that doesn't make any sense. So I'm just going to leave it at that and we're going to carry on. So naturally, Jackson's family did believe that others were involved, that Jackson had been murdered and that the scene was mishandled or misread by the police. That's a really nice way to put it. I should have put it more nicely. Unfortunately, I cannot fathom certain levels of stupidity. If you're watching the visuals, I'm raising my eyebrows. Jackson's family has fought tirelessly for answers. They appeared on 60 Minutes, refusing to let Jackson's death be written off as just another tragedy. For them, the horror isn't just losing Jackson. It's the feeling that justice may never come, that the truth is buried somewhere in those fields in Byron Bay. But Theo and Jackson are not alone. They are just simply some of the more recent names on a much longer list. Since the 1970s, more than 60 young women and girls have vanished or been found dead along that Pacific Highway. And unfortunately, the common denominator in all of these stories is that the police were slow to act, that the cases went cold, and that decades later that they're still waiting for answers. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a wild part, because there are survivors in this story. There are women who never made it into the missing persons file because they actually managed to escape. So after former MP Jeremy Buckingham went public in 2024, suggesting that there might be a possible serial predator or multiple predators that could be behind these disappearances, women began to flood social media with their own near-miss stories. So one woman went on to write how she was hitchhiking near Byron in the early 90s when a car had pulled over. The driver insisted that she get in, but her gut at this point screamed no. Put yourself there. We have all had that gut feeling where we know that something is off. So at that point, she refused to get into the vehicle. And luckily, he did decide to drive off. But that memory stuck with her. The way he stared and the way it felt like she had narrowly avoided something worse. And another went on to recall how they were followed late at night. Footsteps behind her began to grow faster until she ducked into her friend's yard to hide. Now, she was never able to see who this person was, but she never forgot that feeling. Dozens of women shared similar experiences, being offered rides, being pressured to get into cars, being watched, being followed. So suddenly, after reading some of these stories, the idea of a predator or predators being on the North Coast doesn't really feel like paranoia. It kind of feels real. Now we're going to dive into some more stories. Now, Jacques Jedid is another case. In July of 2022, Jacques Jedid, 27, had vanished in Byron Bay. He was described as tall, thin, with long hair that he tied back. He was last seen with a backpack and he was wearing dark pants and runners. The community had responded quickly on social media, and just days later, luckily, he was found safe. This is a reminder that sometimes vigilance can work. Inspector Jay Nataro is another case. In March of 2025, the search begun. He was a 45-year-old Queensland police officer whose surfboard appeared to have been found at the Broken Head Beach near Byron. He failed to show up for work, and despite being a strong swimmer and very experienced surfer, he has never been found. Extensive searches involving New South Wales and Queensland police officers, lifesavers, drones, helicopters, and even actors like Chris Hemsworth, a friend, hasn't been able to locate him. And I think that just shows that when you've even got power like celebrities, it doesn't matter. That much power, you still can't locate your loved ones. And that's horrifying. Eventually, the effort and the search was called off weeks later, leaving behind a cloud of grief and unanswered questions. Rachel Kinkhead is another case. She was last seen in late September of 2024. Now, she was last seen within the Lake Macquarie area. Rachel Kinkhead was 48 years old, and it is believed that she may have travelled to Byron Bay sometime on October 10th. She's known locally, and the police have issued appeals alongside her family, who are deeply concerned for her well-being. Gage Wilson is another case. He was 31 years old, and he was from somewhere between New South Wales and Byron Bay. Somewhere not quite Byron Bay, I think just sort of outside of Byron Bay. And he vanished in May of 2023. His car was found crashed into a tree on a remote road near Wilson's Creek. He was known to have a gentle nature and was partly on the autism spectrum. Family, friends, and local police grounded searches with dogs, but weeks later, Gage was still missing, and his loved ones are still feeling the silence now. And honestly, guys, there are so many more cases and so many more names. Like a very, very sickly, upsetting amount of people. And we could do a part 2. We could go into every single case, but every single case is so similar. And it's, again, the common denominator is that police haven't given a fuck in nearly any of these cases. There's obviously been some that have been the minority, but that's where we're at with it. So really, here's the question. How do 60 plus young people, mostly women, disappear or turn up dead along one stretch of coastline across 5 decades, and we still don't have a single answer? Now, the official line has always been messy. Like I said, it's always been accidents, runaways, suicide, or just isolated tragedies. But so many of these families don't buy it, and there are a lot of red flags in some of these cases that would point to something else going on. Now, when you actually step back and look at the big picture, the theories start to fall into haunting categories. So let's break down some of the theories and categories that I've been able to come up with. So theory 1 is a serial killer or killers. The most chilling theory is generally the simplest, and that is that it's a predator or more than one predators, someone that has stalked that Pacific Highway for decades. Now, the former Greens MP, Jeremy Buckingham, went so far as to call it potentially the worst serial killer in nation's history. He went on to point out how disappearances line up geographically, from Newcastle all the way to Byron, and how eerily similar so many of these victims were: young, female, and last seen near that highway or near nightlife. Now, do you guys remember Ivan Milat? Have you guys ever looked into the case of Ivan Milat? If you haven't, I feel like I've just come up with another case. But this is the backpacker killer, and he was convicted in the 1990s for murdering 7 young travelers and burying their bodies throughout the Bendigo forest. But Ivan Milat was the backpacker killer, and he was responsible for taking the lives of 7 backpackers. Now, this happened in the 1990s, and the bodies were located throughout the Belanglo State Forest. But here's the thing: so many investigators believed that Milat did not work alone. But they also did suspect that he was responsible for more deaths than he was ever really convicted of or ever confessed to. Now, could Milat or someone like him have been prowling that north coast? Did he have copycats potentially, family members, or other predators who took advantage of that same environment? It's a theory that seems to continue to resurface. One predator hiding in plain sight, bending among the locals, picking on the vulnerable one by one. I mean, it's not something we haven't seen before. Now, theory 2 is that there's multiple predators over periods of time, because this is spread across 5 decades, essentially. So if we think about it, the timeline stretches across almost 50 years. That's a long run for one person, but it could explain why the pattern never stopped. Predators take overs where others left off. Men who knew the culture of hitchhiking, backpacking, and late night walks. It's not that far-fetched. So this theory actually terrifies me in more ways than one, because it suggests that the murders weren't one person's nightmare alone. It's a repeating cycle of optimistic killers in one paradise. Theory 3 is essentially that the police were right, that these were all either accidents, bad luck, bad time, bad place, and that no foul play was involved. But then we get to all the institutional failures throughout this case. And honestly, I think that is one explanation as to why we don't have any accurate answers, why I'm giving you guys theories, why I can't tell you if the police were right or not, is because unfortunately there was police failure in this case. So time and time again, families reported their children missing, and they were told that they were runaways, that they wanted to be gone. Case files just sat there gathering dust, and witness reports were never collected. Leads were never followed, evidence was never taken. So take our 3 Newcastle girls, Robin, Amanda, and Leanne. Their families begged for action, but were brushed off again and again. By the time police had admitted to doing something wrong, the trail was already too cold. Or take Theo's case. His family said that from the start he would not have just wandered off. Yet the authorities leaned on a misadventure, effectively closing the door on any further investigation. And then, of course, there's Jackson's case, which is obviously, this is the one that I can't wrap my head around. You've got a knife in his chest and his skull meters away from his body. And still the police lean towards suicide. So each dismissal that the police gave each of these families time and time again was another piece of evidence lost, another year gone, and another family stuck in limbo. Now, I want to touch on the Byron Bay effect. This is something that kept coming up throughout this case. This is something that the locals call the Byron Bay effect. So Byron has long been a magnet for outsiders, surfers, dreamers, backpackers, and seekers. People come to escape or to reinvent themselves. But that transient, free-spirited culture that lives within Byron can also create a lot of blind spots. If someone goes missing, it's kind of easy to assume that they've just moved on, left town, or gone off the grid. And unfortunately, predators would know that. They know that in Byron, a missing backpacker might be dismissed as just somebody that's traveling somewhere else. A missing teen might be written off as another runaway. So, like we said, Byron is paradise, but sometimes a paradise can make it more convenient to cover for the predators. So, in the past few years, something has shifted. For decades, these disappearances were whispered about in pubs, passed along as local warnings, or left buried in yellowing newspaper clippings. But now, the spotlight is back. So documentaries like Murder Down Under, Byron Bay Murders, aired in 2024 and 2025, putting the missing girls of Newcastle, the vanished backpackers of Byron Bay, and all the unsolved deaths along that Pacific Highway back into national conversation. And the families, some of them have already been waiting 40-something years for answers, were suddenly on camera, telling their stories again. Sisters and brothers were describing their last moments with their loved ones. Mothers pulling out old, fading photographs. Even fathers choking back on tears as they admitted to still leaving the porch light on, just in case. And we know that tragedy means the audience couldn't look away. The sheer number of cases and disappearances and murders was staggering. The realization hit that this wasn't an accident. It wasn't random, and it was something bigger that has been happening here for decades. So all this publicity forced the authorities to act. Cold case detectives were brought in to re-examine files that had been gathering all that dust since the 1970s. Boxes of evidence were reopened. Witnesses who had never been interviewed were finally contacted. DNA, once useless, could now be tested with more modern technology. But here's the problem. Time is a predator too, because evidence in time degrades, and along with that, your memory is going to fade. Witnesses will die, and while some of these families hope for breakthroughs, investigators often found only fragments. So, for example, in some cases, bus timetables and witness statements that might have been critical in the 1970s were gone. Physical evidence had been destroyed under old retention policies, and all the leads that were fresh back then were now faint old trails. So I know we keep talking about the former Greens MP, Jeremy Buckingham, but he was really one of the loudest voices calling that this may be a serial killer from the very beginning. So Buckingham demanded a full review of all of the investigations, not just one case at a time. He wanted all of them together, a task force, a recognition that this wasn't an isolated tragedy, but a pattern. And so far, the calls have been met with promises, committees, and reviews, but still no clear answers. So despite the docu-series really raising light and putting the spotlight back on this case, all of the political speeches, the cold case reviews, the survivor testimonies, there's still been no closure. There's not a single arrest or no prime suspect that we know of. No satisfying headline like case closed. Just another coastline that's heavy with questions. And I think the hardest part is, there's a lot of really hard parts in this case, but we're never going to know if the killer ever left Byron. If they really were a local. Was it somebody lurking in the shadows? This is a question that I don't know if I don't want to say we're never going to have the answer, but it feels like we're never going to have the answer. So I could really go on and on about this case. I could. And I've put all of the links below for you guys to further deep dive because, like I said, they brought out a documentary this year and last year that is worth a watch. I think for people that didn't know about it, it really started to open light. I had no idea how many disappearances there were. I think in my head, I thought there was 9, 10. Girl, it's much worse than that. So this is one that you could go on and on. You could go on and on forever. And if you guys want a part two, let me know. But it is one that I'm going to give updates as things progress. And I'm speaking that into existence because this needs to progress. Something needs to happen. So here is what we're left with, my wonderful, incredible, chaotic crime besties. We've got Byron Bay, which is Australia's paradise, a place that people literally travel across the world to see. It's known for its waves, its light, its lifestyle, its atmosphere. But now we know that underneath that is darkness, that there is shadows that spread across decades of coastline. So what really sticks with me in this case is the courage that the families had to speak out, to refuse silence. The mothers who never stopped asking questions and the siblings who still walk the beach at dusk, wondering if their brother or sister took those same steps. So this is the lesson, I think, of the Byron Bay murders. It's that paradise can blind us, that we can't let beauty cover up the darkness, that every single missing person case matters, that whether they vanished in 1978 or last year, we still need to talk about it. So tonight, if you're being a little bit romantic and listening to the ocean or scrolling through Byron Bay holiday snaps, please remember these people's names. Remember their faces and remember the families that are still waiting. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows the truth. And if you do have any information on this case, please get in touch with the links below. So that's your Monday Madness episode for this month. It was really heavy. I know. And it was a lot of cases compact into one episode. So we weren't necessarily able to deep dive into one case. If there is a particular case that jumped out to you, let me know and we can further deep dive. But I hope you enjoyed this different style episode, I think. And I hope you remember what matters in this case. So thank you for sticking with me and for showing up even when all of the stories are messy and uncomfortable. Because as we know, the only way to break silence is to keep talking. And I can talk under fucking water. So with that, until next time, stay loud, stay curious, and never, ever stop seeking the light in the dark.